This database is for everybody in the industry to use and to learn from.
Welcome everyone to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name is Nate Nelson. I'm here with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. He's going to introduce the subject and the guest of today's show. Andrew, how's it going?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Greg Hale. He's the editor and founder of ISSSource, the website and the newsletter, and the ICSStrive website. And he's going to be talking to us about the new ICSStrive website. This is a new industrial or OT security incident repository. And for the record, Greg and I have been working together on a report of the cyber incidents that have been reported recently in that repository, and hopefully that report's going to be available by the time we go to air here.
Then, without further ado, here's you speaking with Greg Hale.
Hello, Greg, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started here, can you maybe introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the good work you're doing at ISSSource and ICSStrive?
All right. Well, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me here today. And I will say this is a little bit of a difference for me as I'm answering questions versus asking like I normally do. But with ISSSource, we created ISSSource 12 years ago, as a matter of fact, and its focus is on writing about safety and security in the industrial manufacturing sector. So we write about everything and anything that has to do with safety and security. And when I'm talking security, I'm talking cyber and physical security. And it was about a year and a half ago, I was talking to some of my cybersecurity friends, and we were talking about there wasn't really a true active database out there. And then about incidents that were occurring in the industry. So therefore, we created ICSStrive.
Which brings us directly to our topic, which is ICSStrive. Can you talk about ICSSstrive? What is it? Where did it come from? What have you got there?
Sure. I'd love to. ICSStrive stands for covering, industrial control system, but security threats, regulations, incidents, vulnerabilities by experts. So we're covering all of that, and we're kind of responding to it. So we will cover all these incidents that are occurring in the industry. And we just celebrated in March our 1-year anniversary. We started talking about it about a year and a half ago, but at the end of March we're 1 year old, and we found that in discussing it, we found there was no real current database of incidents where we could report, research, and learn from. I know when I was doing research on stories, I would have a hard time finding any kind of connections between an incident A and incident B. And so with the help of some of my security friends, we were throwing around some ideas, and we came up with, why don't we create ICSStrive? And with ICSStrive, we're able to search for incidents related to industry sectors, countries, companies, types of attacks, like was it just an out-and-out malware attack or a ransomware attack, or even look up attack groups.
And, industrial security incident repositories have come and gone over the years. I mean, I remember RISI, I think, was the first, and this was 15 years ago. What's different about ICSStrive? What the world needs is a sort of a stable, long-term incident repository that people can rely on and go to for data. Is ICSStrive going to survive? Why should we believe that ICSStrive is going to, survive any longer than all of the other failed attempts have?
I've been around for 12 years with ISSSource. I'm not planning on going anywhere. ICSStrive is an offshoot of what I'm doing. We've had great success in the 1 year that we've been around, and I'm anticipating great success moving forward. Now, the cool thing about it is the stories that I'm reporting on for ISSSource. I'm reporting about incidents, so I'm also able to include all those incidents in the database. So it's not like it's that far fetched for me to do one and the other. So, like I said, I'm planning on this being around for a long time. And yes, we did have the RISI database, and I believe there was another one before that RISI kind of took over. And also when I launched, I think ICS CERT also had some kind of information out there, and they would do investigations and that kind of thing. But they've come and gone, and that's unfortunate. But I think there was a hole out there, and there's a void, and what we're trying to do is fill that hole. And as we at ISSSource continue to grow, I think ICSStrive will also continue to grow moving forward.
Now, Greg touched on it a little briefly. I asked about sustainability. What impressed me about ICSStrive is that it's, in a sense, a very natural offshoot of the work that Greg is doing anyway. I mean, previous incident repositories were run by, in a sense, security experts, by people who investigated incidents, by people who had to be aware of incidents to understand, what's happening in the security world, to apply that knowledge to protect people. And maintaining the incident database for that group of people was extra work, and it was always tough to find who's going to pay for that extra work, who's going to volunteer that extra work, because in a sense, those experts needed to understand what was happening in the world, but they didn't need to understand each and every last incident. Okay, being comprehensive was extra work, whereas Greg sees every incident that occurs out there as an opportunity for him to write articles about. This is what he does. He's a journalist. He's technical. He's got a technical background in the chemical sector, but he's a journalist, and so he needs to write about every incident. And so, having done the research on every incident out there, he said it only makes sense for me to record this somewhere so that when I want to come back to it myself later, I have the data. And he did a little bit of extra work and put it out there on the internet for everybody to use. So, in a sense, this is a very sustainable, it's a very natural offshoot of the work he's doing. That's what appealed to me. When I saw this, I thought, finally, here's a repository that's going to stand the test of time, because it just makes sense for him to do this work.
I agree. And it seems like a relatively useful thing to have out in the world. But I wonder, Andrew, as compared with other repositories, databases that cyber analysts use in their day-to-day work, I'm thinking, for example, about MITRE, categorizing vulnerabilities. Do people really need to know about every incident in the way that they need to know about, for example, every vulnerability, right? If an incident occurred somewhere out in the world, it may or may not pertain to something that would affect me. But if there's a vulnerability out in the world in the software I'm using, that might definitely affect me. So how might cyber analysts use this particular tool, and is it as useful as what we've already got out there?
That's a really good question. And, in a sense, I agree with everything you've said, because you've talked about cyber analysts. We're talking about, in a sense, different audiences for the information. The analysts need to understand the vulnerabilities. They need to understand how much trouble they're in. They do need an understanding of incidents. They need to understand how the bad guys are exploiting the vulnerabilities, in addition to what are the vulnerabilities. So they need sort of both sets of knowledge. But they don't need a comprehensive database of incidents to do their job, whereas they kind of do need a comprehensive database of vulnerabilities. Yes. Here's the thing. The job they're doing is protecting the system. The incident database, where I had people come to me and say, Andrew, isn't there a database of incidents out there somewhere? I need the information. They need the information to spring funding loose. They need the information because business decision makers, you go to them and say, there's another 700 vulnerabilities this month. They go, that was the same as last month. Is anyone exploiting those vulnerabilities? Yeah, 3 of them are being actively exploited. You know, you throw these numbers at the business decision makers, and it's just all Greek to them. Whereas if you go to them and say, 3 other businesses last month, just like ours, were hit by ransomware, every one of those took the business down for up to 3 weeks. It cost them millions of dollars. If we get hit with one of those ransomwares, we're going to go down just like they did. We need to beef up our security. The answer is yes. How much money do you need? And you can have a useful conversation. Incidents persuade people with budget much more readily, in my experience, than vulnerabilities. That's why this is such a valuable resource. That's why people keep wishing, they had one of these resources available to them. Can you tell me a little more? I mean, what kind of incidents are you reporting on? I remember, some of the previous repositories, there was a lot of private disclosures. Yeah, there was an incident, but we can't tell you anything about it, or tell you very little about it. There was a lot of cyber incidents, errors and omissions that weren't really attacks. There was a lot of attacks on, parts of infrastructure that had no consequences. So something got in, and I don't know, some data was stolen. Nothing shut down. To me, what I see people out in the world looking for is consequence. They want to know if there was attacks out there with consequences, what the consequences were. This is the kind of ammunition that they need to shake loose funding for industrial security programs. What kind of incidents are you reporting? What are you seeing out in the world there?
And with the advent of, I'm convinced with the advent of things like social media and more people getting involved and the government getting more involved, that kind of thing, it's more news is coming out about attacks and more. So therefore, more information is out there now. I'm convinced that of the attacks that we reported on in the past year, that was only, it's the cliche to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's the tip of the iceberg. There are plenty of attacks that are going on, and what we want to be able to do is report on them. Now, you were saying people want to know about consequences, and I couldn't agree with you more, man. 100% I couldn't agree with you. But I will also say they want to know about attacks in general, too. So, of the 64 attacks that we reported on last year in ICSStrive, 22 of them had some kind of physical consequences, and that's important to know. But the other attacks that didn't have physical consequences, either they could have, or there was something that was at issue, and therefore we want to be able to report on that. Some of the incidents that we that I kind of I found interesting over the past year were I'll start with the in Iowa, the new cooperative grain attack, where it finally hit me when that happened that a lot of these incidents that occurred, they aren't necessarily, as they say, drive-by attacks. This was a focused attack that was centered on an industry that had perishable goods. So therefore, to me, it tells me that the attackers knew what they were doing. They knew who they were going after. They knew they were incredibly vulnerable, and there was a time difference there. There's a time issue. So they had to get the attack. They had to get it done quickly. Well, that's perfect for ransomware. So, these guys, that new cooperative had to do something in the attacker's mind. Now, as it turned out, from what we've reported on, and who knows what really happened behind the scenes, but new cooperative didn't pay, and they had backups, and they went to backups and started up. So they lost some time, but they didn't lose anything really, except time on their network. Another interesting attack, and everybody knows about it, was the Colonial Pipeline that captured everybody's attention. Again, this happened at a time when it was more of a peak driving time. So more and more gas and oil had to be distributed throughout the East Coast. And man, since I was one of the victims of it, where my area didn't have gasoline to go in the in cars, it hit the industry, or it hit the area, and it hit everybody hard. And it was a panic move on consumers' part, but it worked. That kind of attack worked, and they ended up paying the ransom. Now, the feds got involved, and they ended up getting some of the money back. But that wasn't a very, very effective attack. So these are the kinds of reports that we're looking at and putting in the database. A more recent attack, which I found very interesting, was the it happened in February this year, and the Kojima Industries in Japan was hit. And Kojima is a supplier to Toyota. Now, Toyota wasn't hit at all, but yet they were forced to shut down 28 lines and 14 plants because they couldn't get the supplies from Kojima. So those are the kinds of attacks that I find very compelling. And I'll throw one more out there. And that's the attacks we had on the water industry. We had the Oldsmar attack last year, but that wasn't the only one. And that wasn't, maybe it was a disgruntled employee, maybe it was an attack from some kind of intruder. I don't really know. But what I find interesting is there were other attacks on water plants, and it wasn't just last year. There were previous years attacks in previous years. So, by being able to look these up in the in our database, I just find that you can say, well, it wasn't just a one-off kind of attack. In fact, it was. This is something that's been hitting the water industry, and to me, the water industry attacks are vital because it's one of these sectors that it's underfunded. Security is, I think it's lax, but yet the sector is so important to everyday life that, I just find it interesting to cover that. So, those are some of the attacks that we're talking about, that we cover, and you'll be able to find out more information on that. And plus, not only we do have like a database, but we also have references that, if you want to find out more on the incident, say the Oldsmar incident, we have some references where you can click on them and go to it. Some of them are stories that I have on ISSSource, but some of them are stories in some of our competing publications and other publications throughout the world.
Did you know that power plants are exempt from 1/4 of NERC requirements when those plants use Waterfall's unidirectional security gateways? NERC does not demand that power plants use the gateways, but the regulations recognize the strength of unidirectional protections. The regulations reward sites who use gateways by dramatically reducing the number of security rules for those plants. For details on the exemptions, please download Waterfall's latest report on the NERC standards. You can find the report on the waterfall-security.com website in the Resources tab under eBooks and White Papers.
One thing I'm curious about, Andrew, is, it sounds like Greg is trying to build as comprehensive a database as possible for the industry, but I, in the past, have we all kind of know of organizations that are a bit reticent to admit when they've been the subject of a major incident that might, negatively impact their PR or their relationship with investors, whatever it may be. So is Greg just reporting on what's publicly available? Does he have trouble finding this information? What do we do in scenarios where incidents occur and maybe, it's on the down low?
The easy answer to a question is the database includes, to my knowledge, only incidents that have been recorded or reported in public. And so all of the references, in every little incident report, there's a couple of references Greg mentioned. These are references to newspapers or online magazines, or sometimes the victim company's own press releases saying, yeah, we just got hit, or sometimes to the Securities and Exchange Commission disclosures where they have to disclose certain material impacts on their business. So it's all public information. And sort of to your implied question, is that good enough? I've in the past, there have been sort of a lot of semi-private disclosures, a disclosure saying, somebody got hit, but we can't say who, and we can't really say much about it other than it was this industry. I've never found those kinds of reports terribly credible. I've never found them effective at shaking money loose from decision makers who are saying, how much trouble are we in? If you give the decision makers a list of incidents and they can go to each incident and Google it or click on a link and say, oh, it actually did happen, there's evidence in the world that it did happen, I find that a much more convincing argument. And so I don't miss the private disclosures. What I find most effective is the public disclosures. Okay, so you've given some examples of incidents. You mentioned there were 22. It brings us to the topic of the incident report that the two of us have been working on. For our listeners, can you explain a bit what's in the report? What are the highlights? What do you take away from it?
Yeah, well, we have a joint report that's coming out, an ICS Drive Waterfall report that talks about various industries or incidents. And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier that we reported on 64 incidents last year. And of those 64, as I had mentioned, 22 cyber attacks were that had physical consequences. And that was either in the discrete or the process industries. And these attacks represent a 144% increase over such incidents the previous year, so over 2020. That's huge. And the range of incidents went from areas like water, oil and gas, food and beverage, automotive, to education. And in some cases, we know who was behind them, and others we don't. But one of the beauties of the site is, once we find out more information about these attacks, we're able to go back in and insert the information. So we're constantly trying to update the news and information. And some of the some of the industries or sectors that were hit, from what my quick analysis of it was, in the manufacturing area, more like general manufacturing, we had about 11 firms that were hit. We had 8 in food and beverage, 7 in energy, 6 in oil and gas, and 4 in water and 4 in automotive. And what I also found interesting, we had a couple cloud providers that suffered attacks. So they're not necessarily all attacks with physical consequences, but we're pretty much across the range of sectors throughout the industry that have suffered attacks.
So the numbers that Greg gave there, in a sense, don't add up. He mentioned 22 incidents, but then he gave a breakdown by industry, and it, in my recollection, added up to more than 22. What's going on there is that the report we're writing together is focused on industries that in a sense, I work with routinely, that I have good intelligence on. I don't have good intelligence on hospitals, but I do on power plants and refineries and automobile manufacturing. And so that's that. And another thing is that Greg talks about 64 odd incidents that he's reported in the database. Not all of them had physical consequences. Some of them were near misses. So he talks about Oldsmar, which was actually a near miss. The lie setting was changed, yes, but before that setting could damage or impair the water quality, it was put back. And so, yes, it was an incident, but it was not an incident with physical consequences. Public safety was not impaired. The plant didn't shut down, and so on. So that's what's going on. we're focused on 22 incidents in discrete and process manufacturing with physical consequences, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there in terms of near misses and other industries.
Yeah, if anything, when I heard Greg, tally up things, it struck me that there aren't as many incidents in general out there than I would have expected. Is that naive of me, Andrew, that I just, thought that in the whole world's worth of OT that we would be experiencing more than this?
In a sense, it's not. I mean, there's I saw a number, something like 4,000 ransomware incidents in 2021 worldwide in all industries, mostly on IT networks, finance, education, you name it. These are comparatively small numbers. And 5 years ago, there was even fewer incidents with physical consequences. The reason that there's been such a focus on critical infrastructure security is not because there's been a huge number of incidents and everybody understands the problem. The reason there's been such controversy over it, the reason there's been such a hard time springing funding loose, is because there hasn't been the volume of incidents. The reason there's been concern is because ransomware, tends to shut down processes, and the consequence you suffer, the worst case consequence of ransomware tends to be a shutdown. The worst case consequence of a more malicious attack can be much, much worse. We're talking about switching rail lines inappropriately and passenger trains colliding. Very bad stuff. And so this is why governments and other authorities, and even lay people have been worried about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, because the worst case possible consequences are so very bad. What we're seeing here in the ransomware world is actual incidents, actual compromise with physical consequences. These are starting to become commonplace. I mean, 22 isn't quite commonplace, but it's more than the previous year, and which is quite a bit more than the year before. It's increasing alarmingly. And as the ransomware groups learn that, they have this power, are they going to start using the power to, threaten much more serious consequences, to develop the capability to produce much more serious consequences, and thereby increase the likelihood of ransomware payouts? This is the big concern. Consequences are the concern. You and I, we made some predictions in the report. Can you talk about what we're predicting?
There are a couple things that are, one thing that I found interesting, and you and I had talked about this, and it seems like a lot of nation states, they're ratcheting up their attack scenarios. So they're breaching VPNs and two-factor authentication. We're seeing that a lot of the attackers, not necessarily the nation states, but just the out-and-out attackers, they always lag behind them. So we're kind of predicting that within 3 years or so, that we're going to see these ransomware actors, and not just ransomware, it could be other kinds of kind of malware attacks. They're going to be focusing on using the same things that nation state attackers are using today. They're remote access Trojans to get into victim organizations. That's one of them. I mean, but, Andrew, you tell me, you're seeing, let me ask you a question. What prediction that we made in this report are you seeing as being, kind of compelling?
Greg, you're sounding like you're the host on the podcast here. Are we getting confused? But to answer your question, there's sort of two things that leap out at me. One is, as you observed, what we see is that the attack techniques that are being used by the ransomware groups are tracking nation states, within a couple of years, 3-4 years. So whatever we see the nation states doing to each other today, we should probably expect ransomware to be doing to everybody with money, which is pretty much all of us, within a small number of years. That's the bad news. The good news is we do have a couple of years to get our act together and prepare for that grade of assault. But the other thing that I think leapt out at me was you and I argued about the terminology, but it had to do with ransomware coming in from the internet, from the cloud, if you like. Look at NotPetya. That was like 2017. That's 5 years ago. NotPetya was packaged as a security update to a Ukrainian tax package, got auto-installed on lots of machines all over the world and caused chaos. It took down the world's largest container shipping company for 6 days. It took down a pharmaceutical company that just won a $1.4 billion settlement. Well, maybe it was 1.3, I forget, but it was over $1 billion from their insurance company because of that incident. And what the incident meant was the malware, the nation state malware, was distributed to hundreds or thousands of victims at once. That was 5 years ago. What we saw this year was Kaseya, which is ransomware being distributed as a security update through a cloud-based, security update service that Kaseya managed that had a vulnerability in it. The reports are saying it was up to 1,500. So, let's say more than 1,000 and probably less than 1,500 victims of this ransomware sort of in one go. And so what we're seeing, again, is the ransomware tracking nation-state attack techniques by about 5 years. What I'm looking forward to is, what I'm not looking forward to, what I'm predicting, what I fear is, every industrial security vendor out there, and there's hundreds of vendors. The space is extremely fragmented. I mean, there's the big names everybody knows about, but there's lots and lots of little names in this space. And every one of them is standing up a predictive maintenance service or a management service where they are the experts on their piece of hardware or software, and they get constant updates through connections out to the internet on their stuff, and they can send you a text message or send you an email saying, this piece of equipment needs service. If you don't service it in the next 3 weeks, you're going to see a catastrophic failure. This kind of offering has enormous value. Everyone and their dog is jumping on top of this, but what now you see is connections through firewalls from these vendors on the internet into hundreds and thousands of industrial sites to gather the data. And, every one of those connections could be subverted. Some of these industrial vendors are huge and presumably well defended. Some of them are tiny and maybe not well defended, but may still have connections into 100 or more, manufacturers or critical infrastructure providers. Breach one of these internet-based or cloud-based services, whatever you call them, and send your ransomware into hundreds or, in the worst case, thousands of industrial sites at once inside of encrypted connections right through the firewalls, because the firewalls have been configured to allow connections to these trusted vendors. And we have chaos. We've seen the chaos in Kaseya. I worry that the next step within a small number of years, like 1 or 2 years, it's going to hit all of us. This is what I worry about.
Well, do you see that as being an attack on the? And I'm sorry, I'm asking questions, but I'll kind of answer it also. But are you seeing this as being an attack on the connection or attack on the software that, like the SolarWinds incident, where they were able to get in and manipulate the SolarWinds platform, and therefore then it was sent out via that connection. So I'm kind of seeing, again, I'm not 100% sure here, but I'm seeing that like that supply chain attack methodology is also something that that's going to be a growth area. There are plenty of organizations out there that have started up that are really focusing on that area. So I kind of see it as, one is kind of leading into the other.
In a sense, the SolarWinds attack was something a little bit different. SolarWinds was not, NotPetya was pushed, automatic update to a lot of victims at once. Kaseya was pushed to over 1,000 victims at once. SolarWinds, in a sense, was a little different. The bad guys corrupted the security update, yes, but the victims had to pull the security update and apply it. It was not sort of an automatic, instantaneous bang. Now you're down and out, hundreds of you at once. So I see SolarWinds as a little different scenario. This is something that might take another few years before ransomware gets on top of. But if you look at to answer your question directly, I do not see this as a problem of subverting, of cracking into encrypted connections. Nobody said the crypto was broken. These encrypted connections between Kaseya and their customers that were exploited, the encrypted connections between the presumably encrypted, I don't know if they were encrypted, I assume they were encrypted, it was security updates, the presumably encrypted connections between the Ukrainian tax package and the victims. What happened was, my understanding is that in Kaseya's case, it was the mechanism for distributing security updates that was subverted. In NotPetya, it was the website that was broken into, and the security update was swapped out. So in both cases, and for that matter, in the SolarWinds case as well. I mean, you connect to the SolarWinds website to download security updates with an encrypted connection. Everybody does this. In all three cases, it was the endpoint that in one way or another was compromised. In Kaseya's case, it was with a vulnerability. In NotPetya's case, it might have been a stolen password. In SolarWinds, the bad guys did a very sophisticated break into the development process and silently insert the malware into the artifact, the security update that wound up on the website. In all three cases, the bad stuff was in one end of the encrypted connection and came in through an encrypted connection. So the intrusion detection stuff couldn't even see it. It was inside an encrypted connection. So, this is the blind spot that I see. A lot of people say, I've got a firewall, I've got encryption, I must be good. And they don't realize that encryption protects you from man-in-the-middle attacks. Encryption does not protect you from compromised endpoints. And in all three examples here, they were compromised endpoints. Okay, and so, picking up the role of podcast host here again from you, Greg, thank you. Let me ask you, in the report, there are recommendations. What recommendations speak to you? What do you think is the most important recommendation in the report?
Essentially, everybody knows attacks are continuing and they're becoming more, they're just becoming more abundant. And we're reporting more attacks this year already to this point than we did a year ago. So, and again, I don't know if it's because more and more attacks are being noticed and reported on, or if it's just more attacks. But to me, the industry is doing a great job. There's no doubt about it. But it seems more like they're treading water. We've been talking about there needs to be more of a new approach, and from my recommendation that I catch out of the report is that there has to be a more holistic approach to security for any organization. And that includes a solid understanding of how you secure all the enterprises within the organization. So that means the business side, the manufacturing side, the building automation side, and even the physical security side. These are all components that need to be kind of melded together under that one umbrella. Yeah, there are differences, and yeah, we have to understand the differences and the nuances, but you know what? The classic saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link. I think within that enterprise, that's important to cover. And, if you can get in, I've been looking at the building automation sector of late and looking at that and being able to get in and pivot to the enterprise, or get in and pivot to the OT environment. Man, that's just, you're able to walk right in. So I think that's the recommendation that I would hope that the industry can look at and move forward on.
Okay, so coming back to the repository, other repositories, in previous years, they had ways for members of the public to submit incidents. Is this something that you can do on the ICS Drive site? And in a sense, can you talk about your criteria for including an incident in the repository?
Sure. The quick answer is yes. We can take submissions from the public, but there obviously we have to confirm that. So any kind of submission that comes in, and we have a button at the top of the site that says submit an incident, and so you click on that, and there's a form there to fill out, and you will. But you can have to leave some kind of identification in there, so myself, or some of our other researchers can look up and verify that this was a legit incident that occurred. A lot of what we're doing is, I'm scouring the web and looking at 10Qs and various other things to find out incidents. But this is, like I said early on, this is a database for the industry. So any security professional out there that can submit some information, that would be great. We can take it on through the website.
So that's great. Thank you, Greg, for joining us. Before we let you go, is there a thought you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, it kind of touches on what I was just saying, but this database is for everybody in the industry to use and to learn from, and to help them. I mean, this is to help everybody to make their jobs easier, and to help keep their companies secure as much as possible. But there are other things that you could do. I mean, we have a weekly newsletter that we send out from ISSSource. It's called The Shield. And we do daily stories on our website, ISSSource.com. And we look to see what we can do to help the industry. Anything that the people in the industry want to send to me, information, tips, suggestions, ideas, I'm all in on that. So any kind of information we receive is greatly appreciated.
Andrew, how about a last word to close us out?
Sure, Nate. I'm excited by the fact that we have an OT incident repository that seems sustainable. That looks like it's gonna stand the test of time, because the incidents in the repository are work that Greg, as a journalist, has to do anyway. I mean, I'm also excited by the report we're putting out. I remember, 10 years ago, it was 2012. It was a year or two after Stuxnet hit the news. There weren't a lot of incidents with consequences. And I remember, eagerly anticipating reports that came out of, the various, fledgling OT industrial security companies. The reports that came out of the ICS CERT in the United States and other authorities around the world. I would scrounge, through these reports, eagerly looking for evidence that, bad things were happening, because it's that evidence that, my customers, I work for Waterfall, that my customers needed to shake the money loose. Everybody wants to do the right thing to protect, our critical infrastructures and our other physical processes. But, persuading decision makers to shake the money loose, you've got to persuade them that there's a problem. And incidents were much more compelling than vulnerabilities or, warnings from the government or whatnot. And so, I'm delighted to have this repository that can serve as a foundation for reports, that serves as a resource for people who want to check up on incidents. and to be working on this report, finally contributing to the solution in terms of making data available to decision makers to make the business decisions that they need to give them the justification they need. So I'm looking forward to all of this. If people want to dig into this, a reminder that the URL is ICSStrive.com, ICSStrive. It's that simple, 2 S's. And the analysis report that we're working on at this at this time we're recording isn't done yet. I hope it's going to be posted by the time this episode goes live, but it will be in the reports section on the website, and we'll be announcing it through all of the usual channels.
All right. Then with that, thanks to Greg Hale for speaking with you, Andrew. And as always, Andrew, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Nate. Always a pleasure.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everyone out there listening.